The emergency room never really slept. It only shifted its breathing. At 2:17 a.m., the air inside St. Catherine's Medical Center felt heavier, like it was holding secrets it didn't want to release. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow over polished floors scuffed by years of rushing feet and spilled urgency. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. A gurney rattled past. Somewhere behind a curtain, someone moaned softly, the sound thin and exhausted. And standing near Trauma Bay 3, still as a shadow that didn't quite belong, was the woman in the faded blue scrubs. Her name was Naomi Carter. She stood with her hands folded neatly in front of her, shoulders slightly hunched, posture careful. The fabric of her scrubs had been washed so many times the blue had dulled into something closer to gray. The sleeves were a little too short, revealing wrists marked by faint, old scars and the indent of a cheap watch strap. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, no loose strands, no polish. No makeup. No jewelry except a thin silver chain that disappeared beneath her collar. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She waited. Across the nurse's station, laughter cut through the sterile quiet. "Did you see the chart?" a male voice said, sharp with disbelief. Naomi's eyes flicked up, just for a moment, before returning to the floor. Dar. Evan Whitmore, tall, confident, fresh from a top residency program, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. His white coat was crisp, his name stitched in bold navy letters. He was smiling, but not kindly. "Who assigned her to this case?" he continued, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound conspiratorial instead of cruel. "This isn't a walk-in with a twisted ankle. This is a level 1 trauma." A few of the other doctors snickered. Dar. Melissa Grant, impeccably styled even at this hour, glanced toward Naomi and raised an eyebrow. "She's one of the float nurses, right?" "Something like that," Evan replied. "Or maybe transport. Hard to tell." Their eyes moved over Naomi the way people glanced at outdated equipment, something that existed, but didn't quite matter. Naomi remained where she was. Silent. Invisible. The automatic doors burst open. "Incoming," a paramedic shouted, voice hoarse with urgency. Male, mid-40s, collapsed at a charity gala. Unknown medical history. Unresponsive. Vitals unstable. The gurney came flying in, wheels squealing slightly as it was maneuvered toward Trauma Bay 1. A well-dressed man lay strapped to it, tuxedo jacket cut open, shirt stained dark at the chest. His skin had a frightening gray tint. One arm hung limp off the side, fingers twitching faintly. The room snapped into motion. "Clear the bay. Get respiratory. Where's cardiology?" Naomi moved instinctively, stepping forward, just one pace. Dr. Whitmore lifted a hand without even looking at her. "Not you." The words landed harder than they should have. Naomi stopped. I've worked cardiac trauma before," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, controlled, almost apologetic. "You had to be listening to hear it." Evan finally turned, eyes narrowing. "This isn't the time to experiment." A couple of nurses nearby exchanged looks but said nothing. Naomi nodded once. Understood. She stepped back, pressing herself closer to the wall. As the doctors clustered around the patient, Naomi watched every movement with an intensity that didn't match her stillness. Her eyes tracked the monitor. Her jaw tightened slightly when the heart rate dipped, then spiked. Her fingers curled and uncured at her sides, muscle memory itching to act. Inside the trauma bay, tension thickened. BP's dropping. Why isn't he responding? Get me another line. Dar. Grant frowned at the monitor. Something's not right. His pupils. Probably stress-induced, Evan snapped. He's a rich guy at a fancy event. Too much champagne, too little sleep. Naomi inhaled sharply. She took a step forward again. "Doctor," she said, just loud enough to cut through the noise. With respect, the discoloration around his lips, it suggests hypoxia secondary to something more than cardiac stress. The room went quiet for half a second. Then Evan laughed. Actually laughed. "Did you hear that?" he said, turning to the others. "We've got a diagnostician." A few smiles flickered. One resident coughed, trying to hide a grin. Dr. Grant tilted her head. "Naomi, is it? Why don't you focus on what you're assigned to?" Naomi's cheeks burned. "I was assigned to transport," Evan interrupted. "So transport." The words were clean. Sharp. Final. Naomi swallowed whatever she was about to say and stepped back again, retreating fully this time. The curtain slid closed. From where she stood, she could still see the monitor through the glass panel. The numbers dipped again. A warning tone sounded. Then another. Naomi's heart began to pound, not with fear, but with something far worse. Recognition. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing, mind racing through patterns she had seen before. Patterns that didn't announce themselves loudly. Patterns that waited until it was almost too late. Behind the glass, Evan cursed. "Why is this not stabilizing?" No one answered. Naomi whispered, barely audible, to no one in particular. "You're missing it." The monitor let out a long, uneven beep. And for the first time since the patient arrived, true uncertainty crept into the room. Naomi straightened slowly. Her hands stopped shaking. And though no one noticed yet, something in the emergency room had shifted. Like the air itself was bracing for impact. Naomi Carter had learned, long ago, how to stand without taking up space. It wasn't something they taught in nursing school. It came from years of being the only one in the room who looked like her. From being spoken over, reassigned, corrected even when she was right. From understanding that in places like St. Catherine's, where prestige wore white coats and confidence spoke loudly, silence was often safer than truth. So she stood by the wall, back straight, eyes lowered, absorbing the rhythm of the emergency room the way other people absorbed oxygen. The monitor behind the glass chirped again. Short. Uneven. Naomi felt it in her chest. She shifted her weight slightly, the soles of her worn sneakers whispering against the floor. A janitor's cart rolled past, the man pushing it giving her a brief nod of recognition. She returned it automatically. Small courtesies mattered to people who existed on the edges. Inside Trauma Bay 1, the voices rose. "Why is he still desatting? Did we check for embolism?" "No, his D-dimer was normal." Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. Normal didn't mean safe. She opened them again, watching the patient's chest rise, too shallow, too fast. His skin tone was changing, subtle but unmistakable to someone who had learned to read bodies instead of charts. Her fingers brushed the silver chain at her collar. It had belonged to her mother. Her mother, who had cleaned hospital rooms for 22 years before Naomi ever set foot in one as staff. Who had come home with aching feet and chemical burns on her hands and still quizzed Naomi on anatomy flashcards at the kitchen table. Who had said, "You don't need them to see you. You just need to be ready when they finally do." Naomi had been ready ever since. She hadn't always been quiet. Once, years ago, during her first hospital job, she had spoken up too quickly. Corrected a senior resident in front of a patient. The mistake had been small. The reaction had not. She'd been written up for tone. For lack of deference. For not knowing her place. She'd learned after that. Tonight, though, the room was asking something of her. The warning tone stretched longer this time. A nurse burst out from the trauma bay, eyes wide. "We need blood, now." Naomi moved without thinking, already turning toward the supply fridge. Her hands were steady as she pulled the correct type, checked the label twice, and passed it over. The nurse barely glanced at her. "Thanks," the woman muttered, already rushing back inside. Naomi stayed where she was. From behind the glass, she heard Evan's voice sharpen. "He shouldn't be crashing like this." Dr. Grant's tone was clipped. "We're missing something." Naomi swallowed. She stepped closer to the glass, close enough now that the light reflected faintly off her scrubs. Close enough to see the patient's left hand, how the fingers curled inward slightly, how the nails had taken on a dusky hue. A memory flickered. A case from years ago. An elderly woman brought in from a nursing home. Everyone assumed stroke. Naomi had noticed the smell first. Then the rash, barely visible beneath the gown. She'd spoken up. Been ignored. Until it was almost too late. She'd been right then, too. Her pulse quickened. She raised her voice again, not loud, but firm. "Dr. Whitmore." Evan turned, irritation flashing across his face. "What is it now?" Naomi met his gaze. For the first time that night, she didn't look away. "Please check his medication history," she said. "Specifically beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. And look at his potassium." Evan scoffed. "We already ran labs." "Not the point," Naomi replied. "The interaction pattern fits. His response doesn't match standard protocol." Dr. Grant glanced at Evan, then back at Naomi. "You're saying what, exactly?" Naomi took a breath. She felt the weight of the room press down on her. The unspoken rules, the hierarchy, the expectation that she would fold. She didn't. "I'm saying this isn't just cardiac," she said. "And if we keep treating it like it is, you're going to lose him." The words hung there. Uncomfortable. A beat passed. Then Evan shook his head. "This is not your call." Naomi nodded once. "I know." She stepped back again, but something had changed. Her shoulders no longer curved inward. Her silence now felt deliberate, not imposed. Inside the bay, the patient convulsed slightly. "Damn it," someone shouted. The monitor shrieked, a sharp, continuous alarm that sliced through the ER like a blade. For a split second, everyone froze. Naomi's breath caught. This was the moment. The kind that didn't care about titles or tone or who had spoken last. The kind that stripped people down to what they actually knew. Evan barked orders. "Start compressions." Hands moved. Chaos erupted. Naomi didn't wait for permission. She moved. Fast. Purposeful. She was at the doorway before anyone could stop her, already snapping on gloves, eyes locked on the patient. "Naomi," someone started. She stepped into the bay anyway. The room fell into a strange, stunned quiet, not because the crisis had eased, but because something unspoken had just been crossed. Naomi leaned over the patient, placed 2 fingers against his neck, and said calmly. "Stop compressions." Evan stared at her like she'd committed a crime. "Are you out of your mind?" "No," Naomi said evenly. "But you're about to be." She looked at the monitor, then back at Evan. "If you don't listen to me now," she said, voice steady as stone, "he's going to die in the next 60 seconds. No one laughed this time. The emergency room held its breath. For one suspended moment, the emergency room forgot how to breathe. Naomi Carter stood at the edge of Trauma Bay 1, gloved hands hovering just above the patient's chest, eyes steady, unblinking. The alarms continued their shrill protest, but no one moved. Not because they didn't know what to do, but because they didn't know whether they were allowed to stop her. Dr. Evan Whitmore's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. "You are way out of line," he said, stepping forward. "Step away from the patient." Naomi didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply pointed, 2 fingers, precise, at the monitor. "Look at the QRS widening," she said. "Look at the bradycardia that didn't respond to atropine. Look at his skin. This isn't a heart that's failing on its own. It's being chemically suppressed." Dr. Grant's eyes flicked to the screen. Then back to Naomi. Then back again. Her lips parted slightly. "That's not consistent with acute MI," she murmured. Naomi nodded once. "No. It's consistent with toxicity." Evan let out a sharp laugh. "Now she's diagnosing poison." Naomi finally looked directly at him. "Not poison," she said. "Medication interaction. Possibly intentional, possibly accidental. But if you shock him again without addressing it, you'll make it worse." The word worse landed like a slap. A resident near the back shifted uneasily. "Dr. Whitmore, she's not wrong about the pattern." Evan snapped his head around. "Since when do we take clinical advice from transport staff?" Naomi felt the familiar sting, but she pushed past it. "Check his gala program," she said. "Sponsors list. Pharmaceutical reps. If he's on beta blockers and ingested something else tonight. How would you even know that?" Evan demanded. Naomi hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then she answered. "Because I've seen it before." Her voice wasn't dramatic. It didn't ask to be believed. It simply existed. Dr. Grant studied Naomi now, not as an inconvenience, but as an unknown variable. "Where?" Naomi glanced down at the patient, then back up. "In places where people don't expect it. Free clinics. Underserved wards. ERs that don't have the luxury of specialists on call." Evan scoffed again, but the sound was weaker this time. Dr. Grant turned to the monitor. "Run a tox screen." Evan whirled toward her. "We don't have time for." "Do it," Dr. Grant said sharply. The resident moved immediately. Naomi exhaled slowly. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. As the seconds ticked by, the patient's condition hovered in a terrifying limbo, not crashing, but not recovering either. Naomi adjusted the oxygen mask with practiced ease, her hands gentle but decisive. Evan watched her now, suspicion replacing arrogance. "You handle yourself like someone who's done this a long time," he said. Naomi didn't look at him. "Long enough." "Where did you train?" he pressed. Naomi paused. The question carried weight. She answered anyway. "Howard University." A flicker of surprise crossed a few faces. "And before that?" Dr. Grant asked. Naomi finally met her eyes. "Johns Hopkins." The room stilled again. Evan blinked. "That's not possible." Naomi's mouth tightened, not in anger, but in restraint. "It is," she said. "I just didn't stay." Dr. Grant frowned. "Why not?" Naomi's gaze dropped to the patient's chest, rising and falling unevenly. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "being right isn't enough." The tox screen beeped. The resident stared at the results, then looked up, eyes wide. Positive for calcium channel blocker toxicity. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Dr. Grant sucked in a sharp breath. "That explains everything." Evan's face drained of color. Naomi spoke again, already moving. "We need calcium gluconate. Now. And start glucagon." The resident hesitated, then looked to Dr. Grant. "Do it," she said. As the medication was administered, the room shifted from chaos to focus. Naomi guided hands, corrected placements, called out timing with calm precision. No one questioned her now. The monitor began to change. Slowly. The heart rate stabilized. The QRS narrowed. A collective exhale rippled through the bay. The patient's color improved, just a shade, but enough to be unmistakable. Evan stared at the monitor, then at Naomi. "You saved him," he said, voice hollow. Naomi removed her gloves carefully, peeling them off and discarding them in the biohazard bin. "I did my job," she replied. Dr. Grant stepped closer. "You said you didn't stay at Hopkins. Why?" Naomi finally looked tired. "Because I was told I made people uncomfortable," she said. "Because I asked too many questions. Because I didn't fit the picture of who gets to lead." She met their eyes, one by one. "So I went where the work mattered more than the politics." The emergency room was quiet now. Not tense. Reverent. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time that night, he didn't have anything to say. And Naomi Carter. Quiet woman in scrubs, overlooked and dismissed, stood at the center of the room like someone who had always belonged there. The mystery was no longer what she knew. It was why the world had worked so hard not to listen. The first thing the man felt was pain. Not the sharp, blinding kind, but the deep, aching weight of something that had gone terribly wrong and was only just beginning to right itself. It pulsed behind his eyes, down his chest, through his limbs like a dull echo. The second thing he felt was a hand. Warm. Steady. He opened his eyes slowly, lashes fluttering against the harsh white light above him. The world came into focus in fragments, ceiling tiles, the low hiss of oxygen, the faint beeping of a monitor keeping time with his heart. And then he saw her. She stood beside his bed, slightly to the left, her posture relaxed but attentive. Blue scrubs. Hair pulled back. A face lined not by age, but by experience. Eyes that had seen too much to be startled easily. He swallowed. A.M. I. His voice cracked, dry and unfamiliar. "You're alive," Naomi said gently. "And you're stable. Try not to speak too much yet." He let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh. "That's good." Naomi smiled faintly, not the kind meant to reassure, but the kind that acknowledged reality without sugarcoating it. "You scared us," she added. He closed his eyes again for a moment. When he opened them, his gaze was clearer. "What's your name?" he asked. "Naomi," she replied. "I'm a nurse." He frowned slightly. "You're the one who stopped them." Naomi paused. Across the room, Dr. Grant was reviewing charts, deliberately giving them space. Evan stood near the doorway, arms folded, eyes fixed on the floor. Naomi chose her words carefully. "I spoke up." The man studied her face with surprising intensity for someone who had nearly died. "They weren't listening." "No," Naomi said. "They weren't." His jaw tightened. "But you did." She nodded once. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with more than gratitude. "They told me later what you caught. If you hadn't." She lifted a hand gently. "Let's focus on getting you fully recovered." He didn't let it go. "You knew," he insisted. "Before anyone else did." Naomi met his gaze. "Yes." A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but intimate in its honesty. "What made you stay?" he asked quietly. "When they dismissed you." Naomi's fingers brushed the rail of the bed. "Because leaving would have been easier," she said. "And this job isn't about easy." He watched her like someone trying to memorize a face before it vanished. "My name is Daniel Rhodes," he said. "And I owe you my life." Naomi inclined her head. "I'm glad you're still here, Mr. Rhodes." He shook his head slightly. "Daniel." She accepted it with a small nod. From the doorway, Evan cleared his throat. "Mr. Rhodes, we're going to move you to ICU for observation. Daniel's eyes never left Naomi. She's coming with me. Evan hesitated. She. Dr. Grant stepped in smoothly. She'll accompany the transfer. Naomi glanced at Dr. Grant, surprise flickering briefly across her face. The ICU was quieter. Dimmer. The chaos of the ER replaced by a controlled stillness that felt almost sacred. As they wheeled Daniel down the corridor, Naomi walked beside him, monitoring vitals, adjusting lines, ensuring nothing was overlooked. You're very calm, Daniel said softly. Naomi smiled. I learned early that panic doesn't save anyone. What does? He asked. Preparation, she replied. And listening. They reached the room. As Daniel was settled into bed, he winced slightly. Naomi noticed instantly. Pain. A little. She adjusted her movements confident. It'll ease. He watched her hands. You could have been anywhere, he said. Why here? Naomi paused. She hadn't been asked that in a long time. Because people like me don't always get to choose where we're needed, she said. So when I find a place that needs me, I stay. Daniel absorbed that. I was at a fundraiser tonight, he said after a moment. For medical research. Naomi raised an eyebrow gently. Irony has a sense of humor. He chuckled, then grew serious. Someone gave me a drink. Said it would help me relax. Naomi's expression hardened, not in anger, but in focus. That will be investigated, she said. He nodded. Good. He reached out slightly, hesitating, then resting his hand lightly on her sleeve. Naomi, when I opened my eyes, you were the first face I saw. She stilled. That matters, he said. More than you know. Something in Naomi's chest tightened. She stepped back gently, giving him space. Rest now. I'll be nearby. As she turned to leave, Daniel called after her. They laughed at you, he said. Naomi stopped. Yes, she replied. They were wrong, he said firmly. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders straightened. Outside the room, Evan waited. I misjudged you, he said quietly. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. You did. Then she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, forced to confront the weight of his own silence. The ICU at St. Catherine's moved at a different rhythm. Where the emergency room shouted, the ICU whispered. Machines spoke in low, steady tones. Nurses walked softer. Even time seemed to slow, stretching moments thin, as if daring anyone to relax too soon. Naomi stood at the glass outside Daniel Rhodes's room, reviewing his chart for the third time. Stable vitals. Improving labs. No immediate signs of relapse. And yet, something refused to settle in her chest. She'd learned to trust that feeling. It had saved lives before. Behind the glass, Daniel slept, his face less gray now, more human. Tubes and wires traced careful paths across his body, but the crisis had passed. Or so it appeared. Naomi tapped her pen once against the clipboard. The calcium channel blocker toxicity didn't sit right. Not because it had happened, but because of how. She'd asked for his medication list earlier. Hypertension, mild arrhythmia. Prescriptions carefully managed. Doses conservative. The kind of regimen designed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Accidental overdose was unlikely. She glanced down the hallway. At the far end, two men stood near the vending machines. They didn't look like family. No flowers. No pacing. No whispered prayers. Just suits, dark, expensive, out of place at 3 in the morning. One of them noticed her looking. Their eyes met. The man didn't glance away. Naomi's spine tightened. She turned back to the chart, forcing her breathing to remain even. Don't assume, she reminded herself. But assumptions weren't what made her uneasy. Patterns were. A nurse approached, lowering her voice. Naomi? Dr. Grant wants to see you. Dr. Grant's office smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. She sat behind her desk, jacket draped over the back of her chair, fatigue finally showing around her eyes. Sit, she said. Naomi did. I pulled your file, Dr. Grant said without preamble. Naomi's jaw set slightly. I figured you might. You're overqualified for your position. Naomi didn't respond. Why didn't you ever apply for attending programs again? Dr. Grant asked. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. Because I was tired of fighting rooms before I ever got to fight disease. Dr. Grant studied her. That's a loss for the system. Naomi met her gaze. The system hasn't noticed. Dr. Grant sighed. It noticed tonight. She leaned forward. There's something else. Security flagged unusual access to Mr. Rhodes's chart earlier this evening. Before he arrived. Naomi's stomach dropped. Who? She asked. That's the problem, Dr. Grant said. The access was masked. Administrative level clearance. Naomi pictured the two men by the vending machines. Her voice stayed calm. Someone expected him to end up here. Dr. Grant nodded grimly. Or not leave at all. A knock interrupted them. A hospital administrator stepped in, silver hair, practiced smile. Dr. Grant. I hear we had quite the situation tonight. His eyes flicked to Naomi, then away, dismissive. Yes, Dr. Grant said coolly. We did. Well, the administrator continued, Mr. Rhodes is a very influential individual. There will be inquiries. Naomi stood. Good, she said. There should be. The administrator raised an eyebrow. And you are? Naomi met his gaze without flinching. The reason he's alive. Silence snapped tight. The man cleared his throat. We'll discuss staffing later. Naomi turned back to Dr. Grant. I'd like to stay on Mr. Rhodes's case. Dr. Grant didn't hesitate. Granted. As Naomi left the office, the lights dimmed slightly, night cycle settling in deeper. The hallway felt longer now. Quieter. Too quiet. She reached Daniel's room and stopped. One of the suited men stood just inside the doorway. Can I help you? Naomi asked, voice steady. The man smiled politely. Just checking on a friend. Naomi stepped between him and the bed. Visiting hours are restricted. The man leaned in slightly. We'd hate for complications. Naomi's eyes hardened. So would I, she said. She pressed the call button on the wall. Security arrived within seconds. As the men were escorted away, one of them glanced back at Naomi, his smile gone. That was when she knew. Daniel hadn't just been sick. He had been targeted. Naomi stood by his bed as he slept, the machines humming faithfully. Softly, so softly only the room could hear, she said. Whatever they tried to do, they'll have to get through me now. Outside the glass, dawn crept toward the windows. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, someone realized their plan hadn't worked. Morning arrived at St. Catherine's without warmth. The pale light creeping through the ICU windows didn't feel like hope, it felt like exposure. The kind that revealed things people preferred to keep hidden. Naomi had been awake for nearly 20 hours, but exhaustion hadn't dulled her senses. If anything, it sharpened them. She noticed how footsteps paused when she entered a room. How conversations lowered. How eyes slid away just a beat too late. By 7:12 a.m., the first move was made. It came disguised as routine. Naomi Carter, a clipped voice called from behind her. She turned to see human resources standing near the nurse's station. 2 people this time. Clipboards. Neutral expressions. Yes. We need you to step away from patient care immediately. The words were practiced. Polite. Devastating. For what reason? Naomi asked calmly. One of the physicians has raised concerns about your conduct during last night's emergency, the woman said. Specifically, insubordination and unauthorized medical intervention. Naomi felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Which physician? She asked. The man cleared his throat. That information isn't necessary at this time. Naomi nodded slowly. Across the hall, Evan Whitmore stood frozen. Their eyes met. He looked away. That hurt more than if he'd spoken. I acted to save a patient's life, Naomi said evenly. With documented evidence. We're not disputing the outcome, the HR woman replied. But protocol matters. Naomi glanced toward Daniel's room. Who's covering him? She asked. That will be reassigned. No, Naomi said quietly. He's not stable enough for a handoff without. That's not your decision, the man cut in. Naomi straightened. I want this in writing, she said. The woman nodded stiffly. You'll receive notice. Security arrived, not urgently, but deliberately. It was the walk that broke something inside her. Not the removal. The silence. No one spoke up. Not the nurses she'd trained. Not the residents who'd watched her save a life. Not even Dr. Grant, who stood in her office doorway, jaw tight, powerless under administrative weight. Naomi handed over her badge. It felt heavier than it should have. As she walked past Daniel's room, she paused. Through the glass, his eyes fluttered open. He saw her. Confusion crossed his face. She lifted her hand gently, a silent reassurance she wasn't allowed to give out loud. Then she was escorted out. The hospital doors slid shut behind her with a final hiss. Outside, the morning air felt wrong. Too open. Too bright. Naomi sat in her car for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, knuckles white. They were doing this because she'd been seen. Because she'd interrupted something. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. MS. Carter, a smooth male voice said. You've had quite the night. Who is this? Naomi asked. A concerned party, he replied. We suggest you let this go. Her grip tightened. I don't let patients die quietly. A pause. That stubbornness is admirable, the voice said. But dangerous. The line went dead. Naomi stared at the phone. Then she started the car. She didn't drive home. She drove back. Not inside, she wasn't allowed. But close enough to watch. Close enough to protect. Inside the ICU, Daniel woke fully to find a different nurse at his side. Where's Naomi? He asked hoarsely. The nurse hesitated. She's unavailable. Unavailable how? Another hesitation. She's been placed on administrative leave. Daniel's eyes hardened. Why? I don't know, the nurse said softly. But. I'm sorry. Daniel stared at the ceiling, mind racing despite the fog of medication. He remembered the men. The looks. Naomi's voice. The way she'd stepped in front of his bed without hesitation. This wasn't coincidence. He pressed the call button. I need a phone, he said. And a lawyer. The nurse blinked. Sir. Daniel turned his head, eyes blazing with purpose. They made a mistake, he said. And they're about to find out how loud silence can become when the wrong person is removed. Outside the hospital, Naomi sat in her car, watching the building like it might betray another secret. She didn't know yet that the first attack had failed. Or that the next move would be much louder. By noon, the hospital was buzzing. Not loudly, hospitals rarely did anything loudly, but with the tight, nervous energy of people who knew something was about to break and didn't know where to stand when it did. Naomi was still in her car across the street, sipping cold coffee she didn't remember buying, when her phone rang again. This time, the number wasn't hidden. "Ms. Carter," a calm voice said. "This is Thomas Reed. I represent Daniel Rhodes." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. "I was told not to discuss the case." "You weren't told not to discuss your treatment," Reed replied. "And frankly, they don't get to decide that anymore." Naomi exhaled. "He's awake." "Fully," Reed said. "And furious." Naomi allowed herself the smallest smile. "He should be." Inside St. Catherine's, Daniel Rhodes looked nothing like the man who'd been wheeled and unconscious the night before. Yes, he was pale. Yes, he was still tethered to machines. But his eyes were sharp. Focused. Dangerous. Dr. Grant stood at the foot of his bed, tablet in hand. "They placed her on leave without consulting me," she said. "It came from administration." Daniel's voice was calm. "Administration answers to a board." "Yes. And boards answer to money." Dr. Grant didn't argue. "I want Naomi Carter reinstated immediately," Daniel said. "And I want a full report of every person who accessed my chart before I arrived." Dr. Grant nodded. "I can push for that." But you're afraid," Daniel finished. She hesitated. "Yes." Daniel's mouth curved, not in amusement, but in recognition. "Then let me be the one they're afraid of." By 1:30 p.m., the hospital received notice. A legal team had arrived. Not one attorney. 7. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't raise voices. They simply walked into administrative offices and began asking for files. HR froze. Security called supervisors. Supervisors called the board. And somewhere deep in the building, a quiet panic began to spread. Naomi's phone rang again. "Ms. Carter," Reed said. "Mr. Rhodes requests your presence. As a witness." Naomi hesitated. "They barred me from the premises." "They can't," Reed replied. "Not anymore." She stepped out of her car. The walk back into St. Catherine's felt unreal. Doors opened. Heads turned. Whispers followed her down the hall like a tide. When she reached Daniel's room, he smiled. There was no weakness in it now. "They tried to erase you," he said. "That was their mistake." Naomi stood beside his bed, heart pounding. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," he said. "I did." He gestured toward the door. "These people tried to silence the only person who told me the truth. I don't tolerate that." A hospital administrator entered, face strained. "Mr. Rhodes, perhaps we can discuss this privately." Daniel's gaze hardened. "We are." The man swallowed. "I'm prepared to file a formal complaint," Daniel continued. "Not just about my treatment, but about systemic discrimination and retaliation." The word retaliation landed hard. Naomi felt something loosen in her chest. Dr. Grant stepped forward. For the record, Naomi Carter acted with exceptional clinical judgment. Daniel nodded. Duly noted. The administrator glanced at Naomi, discomfort flickering across his face. "Ms. Carter, your leave is being reconsidered." Naomi didn't smile. "I don't want reconsideration," she said calmly. I want accountability. Silence followed. Daniel chuckled softly. I like her. By evening, the story had started to leak. Not to the press, yet, but through whispers and emails and closed-door conversations. The quiet nurse. The near-fatal mistake. The woman removed instead of praised. And Daniel Rhodes, philanthropist, donor, board member of multiple medical foundations, had decided not to stay quiet. As Naomi left the ICU that night, this time on her own terms, she felt something new. Not triumph. Not vengeance. Momentum. The kind that didn't stop once it started. By the second morning, St. Catherine's no longer felt like a hospital. It felt like a courtroom that hadn't realized it yet. Naomi returned wearing the same faded blue scrubs, but everything else had changed. People looked at her now. Really looked. Some with curiosity. Some with guilt. Some with something close to fear. She walked past the nurse's station and heard her name fall silent behind her. Inside Daniel Rhodes's ICU room, sunlight spilled across the floor in pale bands. He sat upright now, alert, a tablet resting against his knees. The monitors hummed softly, obedient for the moment. You should see this, he said, handing her the screen. It was an internal email. Subject line, urgent. Patient safety review. Naomi scanned the message quickly. Language carefully vague. Apologies without ownership. Promises of investigation without timelines. They're circling, Naomi said. Daniel smiled without warmth. And hoping no one notices the teeth. A knock sounded. Dr. Grant entered, followed by two people Naomi didn't recognize, a woman in a tailored suit and a man carrying a slim briefcase. This is the board's legal counsel, Dr. Grant said. Naomi's jaw tightened. The woman extended a hand. Ms. Carter. We've heard a great deal about you. I imagine you have, Naomi replied, not taking the hand. The woman withdrew it smoothly. We're conducting a review of last night's events. Your cooperation would be appreciated. Daniel spoke before Naomi could. Her cooperation isn't the issue. Your culture is. The man with the briefcase cleared his throat. Mr. Rhodes, with respect. With reality, Daniel cut in. If she hadn't acted, I'd be dead. And instead of thanking her, you removed her. The woman's smile tightened. Mistakes were made. Naomi's voice cut through the room. No. Decisions were made. The air shifted. Dr. Grant exhaled slowly. Naomi continued, calm but unyielding. I was removed because I embarrassed someone. Because I spoke up when I wasn't supposed to. That's not a mistake, that's retaliation. The woman glanced at her colleague. Ms. Carter, we're prepared to offer you a private settlement. Daniel's head snapped up. A settlement? Yes, she said. In exchange for discretion. Naomi laughed once, short, incredulous. You want my silence, she said. We want resolution, the woman replied. Naomi shook her head. Resolution would mean fixing the system that almost killed him. Daniel leaned forward. She's right. The man with the briefcase shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Rhodes, this could become public. Daniel's eyes sharpened. It already is. He tapped the tablet. A local investigative journalist had just posted a vague teaser online. Sources say a St. Catherine's nurse saved a donor's life, then was removed hours later. Naomi's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Then another. And another. She turned it face down. The woman in the suit stood. We'll be in touch. After they left, the room felt lighter, like something poisonous had exited with them. Dr. Grant looked at Naomi. They underestimated you. Naomi nodded. They always do. By afternoon, staff meetings were called. Mandatory attendance. Whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into questions. And questions, once asked, refused to stay quiet. A young resident approached Naomi near the elevator. "I saw what you did," he said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." Naomi met his eyes. "Say it next time." He nodded. Outside the hospital, cameras began to appear. Just one. Then two. Daniel watched from his window, expression unreadable. "They're going to try to control the narrative," he said. Naomi crossed her arms. "Then we don't let them." He smiled. "I didn't survive by being subtle." As evening fell, a press release went live. St. Catherine's announces internal review following emergency room incident. Naomi read it once. Then closed her eyes. This wasn't over. This was the beginning of the loud part. And somewhere in the building, the people who had laughed at her were realizing that the quiet woman in scrubs had never been powerless. They'd just mistaken her patience for permission. The cameras arrived before the truth did. They lined the sidewalk outside St. Catherine's like quiet predators, tripods planted, lenses aimed, reporters murmuring into microphones while pretending not to watch the doors too closely. Hospital security tried to look unbothered. Administrators smiled too much. Inside, Naomi stood in a small conference room with Daniel Rhodes, Thomas Reed, and Dr. Grant. The blinds were half closed, slicing the light into narrow bars across the table. "They're asking about you," Reed said, scrolling through his phone. "Your background. Your credentials." Naomi exhaled slowly. "I never hid them." "They just never looked," Daniel replied. Reed looked up. "There's something else. Your name came up in an old research paper." Naomi stilled. "What paper?" she asked. "Cardiac Pharmacology," Reed said. "Published 8 years ago. Johns Hopkins. First author." Dr. Grant's eyes widened. "First author." Naomi closed her eyes for a brief moment. "That paper changed protocol recommendations," Dr. Grant said quietly. "It was cited everywhere." Daniel stared at Naomi. "That was you?" Naomi nodded. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Dr. Grant asked. Naomi opened her eyes. "Because it never mattered." Silence fell. She continued, voice steady but heavy. "I was recruited straight out of Howard. Hopkins offered me a combined MD-PhD track. I finished my doctorate early. My research focused on medication interactions in high-risk cardiac patients." Daniel leaned back slowly. "Exactly what almost killed me." "Yes," Naomi said. "Exactly." Dr. Grant shook her head in disbelief. "You could have been running a department." Naomi's mouth tightened. "I tried." She looked down at her hands. "When I presented my findings, they praised the data. Then asked if my supervisor could present it instead. When I declined, they said I was difficult. When I spoke up about patient bias in trials, they said I was emotional." Daniel's voice was low. "So you left." "I was pushed," Naomi corrected. Quietly. "No scandal. Just fewer opportunities. Short-term contracts. Recommendations that never came." Reed looked grim. "And you chose nursing." "I chose patience," Naomi said. "They don't care about titles." A knock interrupted them. A junior administrator poked her head in. "Mr. Rhodes, the press is requesting a statement." Daniel stood. Naomi's pulse quickened. "You don't have to." "Yes," he said. "I do." They walked together toward the lobby. As the doors opened, sound crashed over them, voices, questions, shutters clicking. Daniel stepped forward. "My name is Daniel Rhodes," he said clearly. "2 nights ago, I collapsed due to a dangerous medication interaction. I survived because one person spoke up when everyone else dismissed her." He turned slightly, gesturing. "This is Naomi Carter." Cameras swung toward her. Flash. 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 Naomi felt the heat rise in her chest, but she didn't step back. Daniel continued. She was removed from her position hours later. Not because she was wrong, but because she was inconvenient. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Carter, are you a nurse?" Naomi answered before anyone else could. "Yes," she said. "And a doctor. And a researcher." The murmurs rippled instantly. "I led the research that explains what nearly killed Mr. Rhodes," she continued. "And I've seen this pattern before. Patients ignored, voices dismissed, consequences buried." Another reporter yelled, "Why were you working as a nurse?" Naomi met the camera. "Because when systems refuse to listen," she said, "you find other ways to save lives." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel stepped back into frame. Any institution that punishes that deserves to be questioned. The press erupted. Inside the hospital, administrators watched from monitors, faces pale. The quiet woman in scrubs was quiet no longer. And the truth, once spoken aloud, could not be escorted out. The lobby of St. Catherine's had never held that many people at once. Reporters crowded the marble floor. Staff clustered along the walls, pretending to be busy while listening to every word. Security stood rigid, unsure who they were meant to protect anymore. Naomi stood beside Daniel Rhodes as microphones pushed forward like open mouths. "Ms. Carter," a reporter called, "are you saying this hospital retaliated against you for saving a patient's life?" Naomi didn't rush her answer. "Yes," she said. The word landed clean and heavy. Another voice cut in. "Dr. Carter, should we call you doctor?" Naomi felt something twist in her chest, not pride, not bitterness, but clarity. "You can call me Naomi," she said. Titles didn't save that man. Listening did. Behind the glass doors, the hospital's executive leadership gathered in a tight knot. Phones rang. Emails poured in. Legal counsel whispered urgently. They hadn't planned for this. The board chair, Harold Kemp, finally stepped forward. His smile was polished, corporate, brittle. "St. Catherine's takes patient safety very seriously," he began. "We are committed to equity and—" Daniel interrupted him. "Then explain," he said evenly, "why the woman who saved my life was removed from the floor." Kemp's smile twitched. "We're reviewing the incident." Naomi turned to face him. "No," she said. "You're managing optics." The room inhaled sharply. Kemp stiffened. "Ms. Carter, this is not the appropriate forum." "You made it one when you tried to silence me," Naomi replied. She stepped forward slightly. "Not aggressively. Deliberately. I followed evidence. I followed my training. And when I spoke, I was mocked. When I acted, I was punished. That's not policy failure, that's culture." A nurse near the wall whispered, "She's right." More voices joined. "She saved him. They walked her out. They do this all the time." Kemp raised his hands. "Please." Daniel's voice cut through again, calm and lethal. "You will answer her." Silence fell. Kemp looked at Naomi. "What do you want?" Naomi held his gaze. "I want transparency," she said. "I want the names of everyone who accessed Daniel Rhodes's chart before he arrived. I want an independent review of retaliation cases. And I want protections for staff who speak up. And if we refuse? Kemp asked quietly. Daniel answered for her. Then I pull every dollar I've ever donated. And I make sure others do the same. Cameras zoomed in. Kemp's face paled. You'll destroy this hospital, he said. Naomi shook her head. You'll save it. Or it deserves to fall. The board chair looked around, at the staff, the press, the donors watching from screens. He nodded once. We will comply, he said. A murmur rolled through the crowd. The confrontation didn't end there. By evening, internal emails leaked. Screenshots of mocking messages. Complaints buried. Warnings ignored. Names surfaced. Including Evan Whitmore's. Naomi found him later in a quiet hallway. He looked smaller now. Older. I didn't think they'd do this, he said. Naomi studied him. You didn't think you'd be held accountable. He swallowed. I was wrong. Yes, she said. You were. Outside, the story spread. Quiet nurse exposed hospital retaliation. Doctor in scrub saves donor, sparks investigation. Silence broken inside St. Catherine's. Naomi returned home that night exhausted, phone buzzing non-stop. She sat on her couch, shoes still on, and let the weight of it all settle. She hadn't wanted a fight. She'd wanted a pulse. But now that the truth was out, she wasn't going to apologize for the noise it made. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Not because institutions suddenly found their conscience, but because the world was watching. By the third day, St. Catherine's Medical Center released a second statement. This one longer. Less polished. Heavy with legal language and forced humility. Naomi read it on her phone while sitting in her kitchen, sunlight warming the table where her mother used to quiz her on anatomy. She didn't smile when she reached the line that confirmed it. Administrative leave rescinded. That wasn't justice. That was cleanup. Justice came later. It arrived in the form of emails forwarded anonymously. In testimonies whispered, then spoken aloud. In nurses, residents, techs, people who had been quiet for years, finding their voices in the echo Naomi had created. A nurse named Carla described being reprimanded for reporting faulty equipment. A resident admitted he'd been told to let it go after questioning a senior physician's error. A black female surgeon spoke, voice shaking, about being passed over repeatedly despite top outcomes. The pattern was undeniable. Dr. Grant testified publicly. I failed her, she said, standing before an independent review panel. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I didn't protect her. Naomi watched the live stream alone. She felt no triumph. Only a steady, grounded sadness for how much had been allowed to happen before anyone listened. Then the consequences fell. Evan Whitmore resigned. Not quietly. His departure memo cited personal reasons, but the leaked addendum told the truth: documented misconduct, discriminatory behavior, repeated complaints ignored until now. Naomi didn't read it twice. She didn't need to. Next came the board. 2 members stepped down. The chair issued a formal apology, this time naming Naomi Carter directly. The hospital announced new policies: anonymous reporting protections, independent oversight, mandatory bias reviews. Necessary. Late. Daniel Rhodes was discharged on the 5th day. He walked out under his own power, cameras flashing, but he didn't stop for them. Instead, he turned to Naomi. I'm not done, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Neither am I. He smiled. Good. A week later, Naomi sat across from him in a quiet office far from St. Catherine's. I'm funding a new initiative, Daniel said. A clinical research and advocacy center. Naomi listened. Focused on exactly what you've been fighting, he continued. medication interactions, patient safety. And, this is important, led by people who know what it means to be dismissed. Naomi's throat tightened. I want you to run it. She stared at him. You know I don't play politics, she said. I know, Daniel replied. That's why I want you. She didn't answer right away. That night, she visited her mother's grave. The air was cool. Still. They heard me, Naomi whispered. The wind moved gently through the trees. She felt something settle inside her, not closure, but alignment. The next morning, she called Daniel. Yes, she said. Back at St. Catherine's, Naomi returned to the floor one last time. Not to reclaim her place, but to leave it. Nurses hugged her. Residents thanked her. Dr. Grant shook her hand, eyes wet. You changed this place. Naomi shook her head gently. You'll change it. I just opened the door. As she walked out, no one escorted her. She walked freely. Justice hadn't been quiet. And it hadn't been kind. But it had been real. The building didn't look like a hospital. That was the point. Sunlight poured through wide glass walls. The lobby was open, warm, alive with quiet motion instead of frantic urgency. No white coats rushed past without eye contact. No one whispered when someone spoke out of turn. On the wall, in simple lettering, were the words. The Carter Road Center for Patient Safety and Clinical Integrity. Naomi stood just inside the entrance, hands clasped loosely in front of her, the same way she used to stand in the emergency room. But she wasn't waiting anymore. Around her, people gathered, nurses, doctors, researchers, students. Some wore scrubs. Some wore suits. Some wore expressions that said they had traveled a long way just to stand in a room where someone like Naomi Carter was finally centered. Daniel Rhodes stood beside her, looking healthier than he had any right to after everything. You nervous? He asked quietly. Naomi smiled faintly. Only because this matters. He nodded. That's the good kind. A young woman approached Naomi, eyes bright, hands trembling slightly. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. I'm a second-year med student. They told me I ask too many questions. Naomi met her gaze. Good, she said. Keep asking. The ribbon cutting was brief. No long speeches. No grandstanding. When Naomi stepped up to the podium, the room fell into the kind of silence she knew well, the kind that listened. I didn't plan to start a movement, she began. I planned to save one life. A murmur rippled softly. But I learned something, she continued. Silence doesn't just hurt patients. It teaches everyone else to look away. She scanned the room slowly. This center exists because too many people were told to wait their turn, soften their voices, stay in their lane. Here, the only lane that matters is the one that leads to the truth. Applause rose, not thunderous, but sustained. Respectful. Real. Months later, the impact spread. Hospitals adopted new reporting standards modeled after the center's work. Medical schools invited Naomi to speak, not as a diversity panelist, not as a footnote, but as an authority. Research she once had to fight to publish now carried her name in full. And at St. Catherine's, the emergency room felt different. A nurse spoke up about a dosage discrepancy, and was thanked. A resident questioned an attending, and was heard. The culture didn't transform overnight. But it shifted. One evening, long after the cameras were gone, Naomi returned to an ER, not as staff, but as an observer. A young black woman in scrubs stood near Trauma Bay 3, hands folded neatly, eyes sharp. A doctor laughed at something she said. Naomi felt her chest tighten. Then the doctor stopped. Listened. Nodded. Adjusted course. The patient stabilized. Naomi turned away before anyone noticed her. Outside, she breathed in the cool night air. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. You changed more than one outcome. Naomi typed back. No. I just refuse to disappear. She walked on, quiet as ever, but the world had learned something important. When the room falls silent, sometimes it's not because someone has been silenced. It's because the truth has finally entered.